everyone, welcome back to another Directors Educational Special. Here, we make learning easy. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ask questions. Let's get into class. Hello, welcome to class. Now, we'll be talking about the third genre of literature. Remember, we have three genres of literature. We have drama, prose, and poetry. But now we're going to focus on poetry. Man, poetry is what gives students issues during exams. Because a poem you've never seen before, and then they'll ask you, what is the mood of the writer? And you'll be wondering, why would they ask me for the mood of the writer? Was I there when the writer was writing it? But here, Learning Made Easy would give you an opportunity to know how to tackle those poetry questions. But before we talk about those deep poetry questions, let's ask you, what is poetry? What do you think poetry is? Most times I tell students wherever I meet them, the poetry has to do with the poet's feelings, emotions, and the way he pens it down at that moment. I've seen a poem that when I read it, I felt like, wow, this writer is so good. Because I connected myself to every single word I read from that poem. But yes, let's continue our class. Poetry is the study of a piece of writing in verse form. Poetry is what? The study of a piece of writing in verse form. Exceptionally or especially one expressing deep feelings or noble thoughts. Especially one expressing deep feelings or noble thoughts. Now, let's use for instance the poem Nepa by Niyo Shugari. Have you read it? You can please Google it right now and you'll find it online. Nepa. Now, we all know in our present day Nigeria, if you're not from Nigeria, just listen to us. In our present day Nigeria, electricity is a problem. The government decided to sell it to a private company so the private company can handle electricity so that at least we'll have 20-hour power supply, if not the whole 24 hours. But in some places today, you would hear for 6, 7, 8 months they have not had light or power supply. Now in that particular poem, Nia Shundari made us understand that for them to read they have to use candle. Because the NEPA light comes once in a while, and when it comes with children echoing, even till today. I think when I was young, that's when we NEPA! And NEPA means National Electric Power Authority. I think for now, since it has been privatized, we have BEDC, we have AEDC, depending on wherever you are. I think Benin Electrical Distribution Company, Abuja, depending on the location where you are. But we still call them NEPA. Now, Nini Yoshindari made us understand that despite the fact that they don't bring light all the time, they don't supply electricity, the moment they would bring their bill will be on the high side. And when they know they're about to bring their bill, they will give you full power supply. And you'll be like, oh, they're about to come and take their money. Do you get it now? Alright, let's talk about poetry. Poetry is a form of written work where the writer is free to express his thoughts in any way. Hence, you would notice in that poem NEPA, the Nia Shundari added Pidgin English, added Yoruba language, because in poetry it is not enclosed like other genres of literature. In poetry you're free to express yourself anyhow. Just express yourself. Do you get it? Now, and then the writer is given an opportunity to be himself in poetry. The poetry expresses its thoughts in a series of calculated measures, lines or verse called stanza. You would see some poems, they have 2 stanzas, 3 stanzas. Good. So that is how poems are categorized, and there are different types of poetry. There are what? Different types of poetry. One, we have oral poem. We have what? Oral poem. This type of poem is composed orally and chanted. Now, in the traditional Yoruba setting, whenever you go to the king's palace, you will always see somebody. The person will be saying so many things in the Yoruba language in praise of the king. He did not sit down anywhere to write what he is saying. But right there and there, anything he sees triggers something, and he begins to compose it and chant it right there. Do you get it? It's composed orally and chanted. And then number 2, ballad. Another form of poetry is ballad. Now this is a kind of poem that tells a story and is designed to be sung or recited. Now, so many of us never got to meet Shango as a person in the Yoruba culture, but I know you might have read about him in history, you might have learnt about him one way or the other. But there are some poems that are sung about him that make you to understand who Shango truly was, the things he did, the kind of life he lived. Such a poem is what we call ballad. Such a poem is what we call what? Ballad. Sometimes it might be the story of a community song. Sometimes if you watch, there's this channel Orisun. What he does, he talks about different Yoruba communities in their history, and while I'm telling you their history, they chant a ballad about the history of that place, and then you begin to learn one or two things about the reason why they have a particular culture or the other. Now, another form of poetry is the lyric. The lyric. And this lyric is a song-like poem. It expresses individual or private emotions. Do you get it? It's somehow, you can sing it, it looks like a song, but not necessarily a song. It expresses the emotion of the writer as at that moment. Now, another form of poetry is the ode. The ode can also be called a romantic poem because it's praises, it gives praise to a particular thing, particular person, object, whatever it is. So when they say ode to something, it means I'm praising that particular thing. Now, this is a long poem used in praising somebody or a thing of nature. There's a long poem used in praising someone or a thing of nature. And then you have elegy. Elegy. Now, elegy or dirge. How many of you have attended a burial ceremony before? Good. You would notice, especially if it is the burial ceremony of a great person in a community, there will be a wailer who will be saying so many good deeds the person have done, the things he has done, how he achieved those things, what people gained from him. That is what we call a dirge or elegy. This with songs of lamentation of the dead. This with what? Songs of lamentation of the dead. Another is epic. This is a long poem that talks about a person's heroic deeds or actions of a great importance. An example is Nelson Mandela. Now, a South African wrote a poem about him. That particular poem is what we can call an epic. There's no one who doesn't know that Nelson Mandela was one of the people who fought for Africa's freedom, especially those of the South Africans. Now, you have epitaph. Epitaph is that short inscription you see written on a tomb. You go to some graveyards, you see, here lies Baba Lagbaja, who lived his life for his people. That song, like that thing that looks like that rhymes, is what we call an epitaph, because it is written on the tomb of a dead person. And then blank verse. Now, blank verse is a 10-line poem with a rhyme scheme of 5 stressed lines and 5 unstressed lines. It has the rhyme scheme of 5 stressed and 5 unstressed lines. That is what we call a blank verse. And then epigram. Epigram is a short poem expressing a point, usually using a satire. Remember satire one way or the other exposes the ills of the society, right? Good. So epigram works with satire as a short poem that expresses a point. Usually, at times, it exposes the ills and then provides solutions. Now we have pastoral poem. Pastoral poem. Now, pastoral poem is a poem that shows simple rural life among common people. It shows what? Simple rural life among common people. So when you're reading a poem that has to do with a shepherd boy and some sheep, that is a pastoral poem. When you're reading about a person living in a village, in a small community where they don't have water, where they have to take everything green, that is a pastoral poem. Simple life. Do you get it? And then parody. This is the imitation of another writer's poem with the sole aim of mocking or ridiculing that person. Now when you copy someone's poem and then rewrite it with the aim of mocking the person, that, oh, look at what he wrote about this. That is what we call parody. Though parody is not so common. Alright, and then we have panegyric. This poem is meant to eulogize heroic deeds. Just like we talked about before, we said panegyric poem is meant to eulogize heroic deeds or attributes of an individual. It is common among the common traditional African poetry. So you know, some animals, they hold distinct nature. In a particular place in Delta State, they worship the iguana, because the iguana has two tongues, as if the tongue is slit, one facing the other side, and like that, vis-a-vis. Now, this iguana, it roams around this particular community in Delta State. They don't kill it because they believe they originated from that iguana. And in that particular community, they speak two languages. They believe they speak Urhobo language and Delta Igbo language. So it is believed that the way the iguana has two tongues, that's how they too have two tongues. Do you get it now? Now the limerick is a humorous 5-line poem. It is a humorous what? 5-line poem. There's so many things about poetry that we can talk about right now. But let's talk about the sounds in poetry. Remember, the sounds in poetry are like the figures of speech. Or do we take it in another class? No, let's go on. Assonance. Assonance. Assonance is a repetition of the same vowel sound in a line of poetry. Assonance is a repetition of the same vowel sound in a line of poetry. I have a love that I love too well. I have a love that I love too well is an example of an assonance. The of, have, love is repeated. Do you get it? Alright, consonants. Consonants. This is the reoccurrence of consonant sounds in the middle or at the end of words in a line of poetry. Don't belittle the flipping wing. Don't belittle the flipping wing. And then we have alliteration. Now, listen. Alliteration and consonants are different from each other. Some textbooks don't even bother talking about consonants at all. But alliteration and consonants are very different. Remember, consonants has to do with you repeating consonant sounds in the middle or at the end of words in a line of poetry. Unlike alliteration, that is the repetition of the initial consonant in a line. The repetition of initial consonants in a line. The example, Father Francis fried 5 fishes for 5 famous fathers. The F is being repeated. Do you get it? Okay, let's move on. We have imagery. Imagery is the mental representation of anything. The mental representation of anything in a work of art. And then we have symbolism. Symbolism is the representation of one thing by another. You know, where you want to talk about school and then you represent it with a chalk. We already know you're talking about education. Do Do you get it? Okay. Now structure. Structure. This deals with how things are put together in a poem. Structure deals with how things are put together in a poem. And we have two types of structures. We have how many? Two types of structures. One is the static structure. This type of poem is devoted to praising or discussing the object in a poem. This type of poem is what? Is used in praising or discussing a particular object in a poem. What type of structure is that? Static structure. Now the other one is what we call dynamic structure. The dynamic structure is when there are changes in ideas in a poem. There are changes in ideas and emotions in a particular poem. That's what we call what? Dynamic structure. So let's say, for example, bats. At the beginning of the poem, the author was talking about swan who were enjoying themselves and flying with their white feathers. Everything was beautiful. And all of a sudden, everything became black. And they changed guards with the bats. And then he enjoyed the swift movement. But he got to the end of the poem and he told us that for him, he hates bats. Do you get it? Alright. We have foreshadowing. Now this deals with a sign that tells you something that is about to preempt itself in the poem or feature in the poem. Onomatopoeia is the use of the sound derived from a particular object to describe that object. But before we go today, let's deal with at least 3 questions. Are you ready? Okay. A narrative poem must what must a narrative poem do? It must tell a story. A narrative poem must tell a story. Let's take another question. A poem written in honor and praise of someone is. A poem written in honor and praise of someone is. Remember I told you I used Nelson Mandela as an example. So what is it? Good. An epic. An epic. Look at this now. What is a blank verse? What is a blank verse? Blank verse consists of 5 rhymed, 5 stressed lines and 5 unstressed lines. Don't forget. When a story is told in a song and passed down by word of mouth from one generation to the other, it is called what? A ballad. A ballad. I hope you enjoyed today's class. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. See you in our next class. Do have a wonderful day. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Bye-bye.